Okay, welcome to, it's so good to have you here in person, as Jimmy Durante used to say. It's good to meet you, really good talking with you. And in the audience, welcome very, very much to Conversations. We have here with us today Vincent Morgan. And Vincent Morgan is a young man running for the the United States House of Representative seat for the District 15 here in Manhattan or in Harlem. And Vincent, welcome so very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
It's my great good pleasure. It's good to meet you the other day on a group talk you had and so forth. But we have a chance to talk in some depth, and we're going to be able to air this on primary election day. So let's hope that it might help people come to know you a little bit better. And could you share with me at the beginning your own background, born and raised, that kind of thing, a little of the education, and then we'll talk about the human condition and the campaign. But share your own background if you would, please.
Well, I was born and raised in Chicago in 1969 and grew up on the south side of Chicago in an area very much like the area that I hope to represent now in New York. There's Harlem in New York, and then I was born and raised in Bronzeville on South Parkway, 48th and King Drive. So it was the equivalent of Harlem in Chicago.
Is that the same, like Harlem's uptown, is that the same? South side Chicago is sort of like Harlem? Is that
the particular area that I grew up in is very, very comparable to Harlem.
That's where a lot of good action would be going on.
Yeah, the Apollo Theater was in Harlem, and in Chicago we had the Regal Theater.
There you
I
go.
grew up about a block away from the Regal Theater, and it's where the hustle and bustle and the great music and the thought leaders of the times lived.
Couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, okay. I'm glad to hear that.
But at the same time, in the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, very much like Harlem, when people were moving out of the urban centers, it suffered from urban decay.
Okay.
And a lot of people moved out. There was a lot of vacant lots, a lot of rundown or abandoned buildings, and it was a very challenging environment to grow up in.
Yeah.
From a community that had been such a vibrant community the generation before.
That's very interesting, yeah. What about the family setting?
The family setting, I was raised by a single mother.
Oh, really? That's tough, yeah.
My mother and father, they parted ways before I was born. So I was raised by a single mother and a grandmother. You know, you always have that central figure in your life that takes charge when your mom is out working.
Thank goodness for the grandmothers.
And the grandmother lived at 48th and King Drive. And that was sort of my safety net. That was a place that I spent most of my time, and she reared me the old-fashioned way.
Okay, what does that mean, if I may? I don't know, old-fashioned way.
I think
spare the rod, spoil the child, kind of thing.
Exactly. But more importantly, attention and making sure that you're doing your homework and making sure that you have an eye that's looking out for you when you're playing outside. Making sure that if you're moving in the wrong direction, that you're grabbed, sometimes forcefully, and pulled back into the right direction.
Do you think that translates out where the elders who are dealing with the upcoming generation want the younger generation to have structure in their lives that makes that Spock was the one who, I had 2 kids and everything, and Benjamin Spock was the one who everybody read on how to raise a kid and everything like that. And it was all about non-authoritarian. Non-structure. Let the person be whatever they are. Just give them lots of love. And don't be particularly concerned with structure and discipline, And yet, do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
That
exactly
was the spirit of that age, and it was a lot of people, maybe a lot of people who are already comfortable, maybe materially in that. But this idea of structure and the idea of having structure be brought down upon the youth and to get them so that they'll do their... I don't know. What do you think? I don't know.
I have 2 small children.
Oh, that might translate out into the way we're going to see society.
I have 2 small children. I have a 2-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter.
Aren't they wonderful?
They are.
I know.
And guess what?
Yeah.
I want to give them all the love in the world that I can give them, but at the same time, they just act better when we have a structured environment for them.
It's kind of hard to get a 1-year-old.
They act better when they eat on time, on a regular basis every day, when they go to sleep on time on a regular basis, when we have activities at a certain time. They just function better when there's some type of structure.
Want regularity.
Right.
They want regularity, and surety is what they want, I guess is right.
But at the same time, the balance between giving them the freedom to express themselves and sort of develop in the way that they want to develop. Kids have so much more stimulus now than they did.
That's true. I think it's true.
20 years ago, 30 years ago.
I think it's true, yeah.
Because they've got television, television and they've got all of these other sensory things that are in their world.
Right.
That is very different now because their attention is a lot shorter, I think, because they've got all of the stimuli that's coming at them at a different point.
Boy, that's true, isn't it?
So I remember being a kid and just sitting and imagining and not really having a TV.
You ever see George Carlin? Did you like George Carlin? I love
Big
George.
fan.
I wept when
he passed away. He passed away a couple of years ago.
And
yeah, but he's really funny
what's
guy.
his name? The guy who played Zero Must Tell. I mean, another. But George Carlin was there in one of the riffs he was doing, and he said, "Whatever happened with a kid?" I mean, they had a movie about how they got every 15 minutes of the day structured with this, and we're going to improve you this and that and all this and everything. He said, "Whatever happened when you just let the kid go in the field with a stick and just sort of sit there, you know?"
Right.
You know what I mean? It's something like they leave them alone and just let them be. You know, I think it's an important question. I don't know how to formulate a question, but that idea of structure is associated with authoritarianism in some people's minds.
Well, I think that we need to come with a balance between structure and between sort of being free to be you and me. I mean, we grew up in the free to be you and me generation. You remember the Free to Be You and Me, the children's album of the early 70s?
Well, I remember it all. But you understand, we're two different generations, you and I. When I was your age, I was about your age. Anyway. But it was different, and but I think that question is a big one about how could people be just left to be themselves and be free to do what they want, you know, instead of...
Physical activity, though, is one thing that I see in young people. And with all of the stimuli and all of this reliance on television and on video games and on things that really create activities that they do individually, it takes away from the activities that I used to do when I was a kid. We used to be out, you know, playing stickball and playing basketball and sort of being out and being physically engaged with other kids. And in some instances, a lot of instances, you see kids that are behind video games and they're not physically active, and you're starting to see that in the increase in childhood obesity and just this wall, I think, that some kids have up because they're more into the video game than they're into personal relationships.
Our First Lady's looking at that now. You know, the obesity issue, it is really odd because you got all this fructose and whatnot in the diet. There's all kinds of things, and it's all that kind of, that's a big issue, and so it's one I'm very interested in. I don't know what to say about it except I just think that. Anyway, you were brought up there. Did you like school?
You know, I was raised and brought up in the same neighborhood, and the consistency in my life, because my mom moved around a lot, was my grandmother's house in Bronzeville.
That was ground zero for you, in a sense.
And I was fortunate because I went to a parochial, an inner city parochial Catholic school across the street from my grandmother's house.
Well, that's convenient.
And so there was there was a real consistent force in my life. And since I went to school across the street from my grandmother's, I'd go to school, and then I'd go to my grandmother's, and then later, after my mom got off of work, she would come pick me up.
Right,
So I was fortunate because I had some grounding.
Yes, right.
And I had
and that's part of an extended family. There used to be much more there than it is now. You got people scattered all over the world.
And you know, one of the things with young folks, and one of the things that I was fortunate to have was that type of grounding early on and that consistency.
That's really important. And those imprints that are coming in when you're just in the cradle and all that are really important. I think we're learning like crazy when we come out of the womb. I mean, it's just almost downhill from there.
Yeah, having two small children, I see it every day. I'm amazed at what my children do and say every day.
I know.
But you know, but even though I had that solid grounding, I was around this challenging environment. It helped me get through the challenging environment that we lived in. You know, I'll flash forward to high school.
Yeah. Okay. How'd you like it? Did you like it then?
You know, most people look at me and they don't realize this. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 years old.
You were a dropout, right?
I was a dropout. I was a dropout.
Well, you know who else was a dropout was Bill Gates. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard.
He dropped out of college.
Yeah.
Dropping out of high school and dropping out of college, I mean, it's two different things. 'Cause at least he had his high school diploma.
Okay.
And one of the things about dropping out of high school, and you know, we live in a city.
Yes, sir.
Where we have a dropout rate that's close to 50%.
Yeah, what about that? People don't want to go to school. We want to get to charter schools and that kind of stuff that's up now.
But you know, in a city where we have a dropout rate that's hovering around 50%, and in some districts, you know, and we go to some places in our district, and you know, we've got a 70-80% dropout rate on some blocks or in some buildings, and it's just appalling when you think that the 15th Congressional District has Columbia University, City College in New York, Yeshiva University.
Oh, it includes City College also. Yeah, up on 138.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
so you know, we have these great institutions of higher learning, and then we have all of these people who've chosen not to finish their high school diploma.
Okay, now what about
over 100,000 people in our district over the age of 25 don't have a high school diploma.
Okay, now what about that and everything? Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer didn't like school. I didn't like school. I would have much rather played baseball. And you had to go to school, and it seems to me you had to listen to somebody who was an authority figure that's going to bring some structure to you. But I never liked it. I never liked school. I was too busy reading things or doing things on my own.
Right.
Because we had a rich environment with the Encyclopedia Britannica, good talk around the table, Harvard classics, that kind of stuff. And you're busy, and you would go, and they would insist upon you doing what you're supposed to do at 8:30. You don't want to do something at 8:30. You want to do something else. And it wasn't open to what would be called autodidact, where you can go on your own steam, you know. And there's a lot of people objecting to that. And back to the media. The media is getting there now. We've got 500 channels. Bruce Springsteen wrote a song about television, multimedia. And the sensorium of multimedia communications is different than linear, like the print and everything.
Sure.
But he said 57 channels and nothing on. Now we got 500 channels and in many ways nothing on.
Correct.
It's just another adventure thing. But there's a great deal of things. The History Channel International, and other channels where they're taking the best minds, or public television is really good. They're getting the best minds in the world, and they're putting things in a way that's multimedia, the way we encourage they see the world. And you're not being forced to do what somebody else thinks you ought to do at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning. And there people object to that because maybe, and couldn't the media be something where they could be getting and engaging the interests of the people at young age and educating themselves without going to a place where they have it all structured?
Let's take back to the education.
Or back to the structure.
Absolutely right. And you know, different people are interested in different things.
Amen.
I mean, you know, if you talk to young people or you inspire them, give them options to be exposed to things. That's the biggest thing.
Or
give them options to be exposed to things so that they can try it out and see if they have an aptitude for it. Not everybody wants to become a doctor. Not everybody wants to become a lawyer. Not everybody wants to become a banker. Not everybody, but everybody has a natural gift and a natural talent, or can be inclined to do, you know, certain things, including being artists, including being writers.
Sure to the artists. But anyway, could I share something with you? Something I don't know. I have a lot of information sloshing around in my head, but this is really pretty accurate, right? I mean the subjective judgment of the accuracy of what's being made. There's a lot of statements being, but this is about right up there 90% accurate, that there were a bunch of psychologists and psychiatrists took a measure, and there are lots of different states of human consciousness. There's you know, a lot of different states, and take the one that is called creative. A creative way of being for a biological entity, a human being. There's a certain way that is creative. Okay? It should be valued, it seems to me. There's others. If you're going to have to stand on an assembly line for 12 hours a day turning a nut all day in Henry Ford's factory, you do not want to be creative. All you have to do is be rote. And things can be, make the point. But they took the measure of the creative, and they found that across the world, that the state of, and they could make measurements that seemed to me to be accurate, across the world, cross-culturally, it peaks at 5. So across the world, the people that have a consciousness that is creative are the 5-year-olds. And then it goes downhill from there. They go to school. The school is there to teach them what? Practicality. And when they measure the school, the advantage of going to school. Do you see what? Okay, let me just finish the point. When you look in the magazines and they equate going to school, you know what they always equate it with? How much is that worth? how much are you going to make in terms of more money if you go to school and become successful
Sure.
within the established order?
We need to get back.
It doesn't measure creativity.
That's very true, but we need to go back to the principles of what education should be about.
Another big issue.
Education should be about, and we're at a point in our history where we're going to have to, as a country,
re-envision and a world,
and reinvent. Well, let's talk about the country first, because we got a problem in this country.
We're got a problem in River City.
We're 28th in the world when it comes to science. We're 25th in the world when it comes to math. And we're in the bottom rung of every category when it comes to education. And how in the richest country in the world do we have an educational system that's failing all of our children? Unless you can afford to pay for, high-end, fancy, schools to send your kids to.
Yeah,
most people I know, including folks that have, are gainfully employed, have a hard time, making enough ends meet to pay.
Gainfully employed, they're materially well off.
Yeah,
gainfully employed links what you do with the money you get.
Materially, living in a city like New York, I know a lot of folks who struggle, and they are looked at in other parts of the country as making, more money than average. But the reality is that it's so expensive being in this city that a lot of folks that make, a six-figure income aren't really doing as well as they would, in another place of the country.
But you're interested in the
going
education.
back to education,
please,
though, and I'm passionate about education.
Okay, good.
Because I dropped out of school when I was 16 years old.
Yeah, what was your attitude? Do you remember, can you think back to what you were thinking when you dropped out?
I thought
What was your grandmother saying to you when you dropped out?
She thought I was a nut, and she...
Why did you drop out? What do you think? Were you rebelling?
I dropped out for partially what you're talking about, and it's because I just wasn't interested in some of the stuff that I did.
Me too, it was boring. It was boring to tell you the truth.
Back on it,
now you should have had that structure.
Sure, but education is supposed to be a place where your imagination is challenged.
Well, that's called creativity.
Where your brain is challenged to understand and learn the basic fundamentals of math and science and those things. To even figure out if you have an aptitude.
What are the basic fundamentals we have to teach? What do we have to teach?
We have to teach English, we have to teach math, and we have to teach science.
How about history?
I believe.
How about history? How about geography? How about physics?
All of those things.
And then you've got this idea of...
Hold up, let me make my point, Chandler.
Okay.
The point is, though, that we go back to what you said about, what if I'm not interested in all of that stuff? But the reality is, to develop as a human being, you have to have exposure to all of those things, at least the basics of all of those things.
Well, they're exposed now by multimedia. They're exposed
well,
overwhelmingly.
That goes to the next part of the question of how we educate.
Okay.
And I think there is something, too, saying that we can tie technology and multimedia and the ways that people are comfortable with learning today into the educational system.
Yes, it could be exciting. The stuff they've got on things.
And we're going to have to re-envision.
Everything is inherently interesting and is able to be understood and is coming now.
And it can come right to you now with technology.
Yeah, do you realize all the Nova series?
But, the great thing about technology, and let me make this point, the great thing about technology, and you're right, if we re-envision an educational system where instead of like picking up a two-dimensional piece of paper and looking at it, and reading about something, we can actually take you there.
Like the way it's multi-sensorial.
Via the internet, via multimedia.
This program, young man.
You can even do it in 3D.
Yeah.
Where you can physically be there and feel like you're in the actual place. So we can re-envision the educational system so that more of our young people are inspired by it and inspired to learn in the system. Now let's take that back to being a high school dropout.
All right, yeah.
I dropped out of high school because I was disenchanted with my environment. And I thought, like a testosterone-filled 16-year-old, I thought I was smarter than I was and made the biggest mistake of my life. But guess what?
You compensated.
No. I actually, made a dumb decision, but I got knocked upside the head a couple of times with reality, and it just had some experiences that just proved to me that I made a dumb decision. But then I was fortunate because I had people who came out of the woodwork and said, I refuse to let this young man fail. And they helped me. I had a woman who was an educator. She was the mother of a young lady that I was seeing in high school. Yeah. And I go over to this young lady's house all the time when we were in school. We went to high school together.
That seems to happen a lot among teenagers.
And, after I dropped out of high school, I remember going to her house once, and her mother greeted me at the door. And she peeked out of the door, the crack in the door. And I said, well, hi, how are you? I'm here like I always am. And she said, I'm sorry, you're not welcome in my house anymore. My daughter doesn't hang out with high school dropouts. And she slammed the door in my face.
Wow.
But for a 16-year-old kid who's too smart for his own britches, you know, that was one of the first wake-up calls that I needed to let me know that what I did wasn't right. And it was something that was going to hold me back. Now, long story short, 3 weeks later, I get a call from the young lady that I was seeing in high school. And she says, I've got somebody here that wants to talk to you. And she put her mother on the phone. And her mother was an educator. And her mother said...
The one who slammed the door?
The one who slammed the door on my face. She said, I just can't sit back and watch you fail. So if you're willing to take responsibility, I'm going to help you. Okay. That woman helped me get into a program at junior college in Chicago, and that
didn't have to get a GED.
No, they helped me get the GED so I can go to.
Was that was that a difficult process?
The GED test is a very difficult test.
Is it really?
And you know, I spent a long time in life being sort of ashamed that I had a GED because the society tells you that there's something wrong with it. That
I don't think you should always
to
listen to what society say, because there are other things that
that's
are
exactly the point that I'm about to make.
Listen to yourself, brother. Yeah.
That's the point that I'm about to make. You know, society tells you one thing. The reality is it's a difficult test. We should be celebrating people that actually go back and get their GEDs because they had the tenacity, they had the wisdom, they had the insight to go through what's a very difficult test and get everything, because the test is everything you're supposed to learn in high school.
Okay, that's
down to 8 hours.
Oh, the test is 8 hours?
Yeah.
That's a long test.
Yeah,
that's
so
like
it's
the bar
broken into parts. Anyway,
Yeah.
Long story short, though, I had help along the way. So one of my passions is to make sure that we figure out the high school dropout problem, and we get more people, that 100,000 people that live in our district that don't have high school diplomas, to either get their GED or go back to high school, but first and foremost, stay in high school if they're on the fence. But to figure out a way to eradicate, you know, the high school dropout problem.
Right.
Because if you drop out of high school, absolutely.
It's
in this country we have a dropout rate that is just embarrassing for a country that is the foundation of what we talk about is all about education.
I would ask that question. I don't know, back in the days
dropping out of high school traps you in poverty.
Okay, that's the link that's made. It doesn't have to do with the fact you're not going to know anything.
Right.
That doesn't figure in. It's only that it has to do with economics.
But you know what? But
I mean,
to make well-rounded people, and let's not escape the fact that we all have to sustain ourselves in some type of way. Whether we want to be an artist or whether we want to be a rocket scientist, there's a certain basic foundation that we have to establish for ourselves. And the education may not be for everybody, but you know, sometimes we have to do things that are that bitter medicine that's going to make us better. And I firmly believe that as the basics of education we have to have as people, because that is the foundation that everything else comes from.
Well, that's interesting. They have an idea in college about, you know, prerequisite, and you have to know this before you know that and everything. But what do we have to know? Like, for instance, language. Nobody teaches somebody how to talk. You learn it at your mother's knee environmentally. You just learn. You don't have to be taught how to talk.
You do, but
talking
and communicating, the foundations of being able to speak and being able to write. You know, we've gotten away from even having a good, solid foundation on written communication.
It's all going multimedia now,
right? But you know, it's been proven scientifically that the neurons that work in our brains are stimulated by activity. And those cells and neurons that are working, I don't know the proper terminology for it, but the science of it is that your brain has to be active in order to function properly. I got a
website you could go to. They got a thing from Harvard Medical School that the 10 to the 10th or 11th power neurons that are connected by the axons in the brain are activated most acutely and in a most educated way by multisensorial or multimedia stimulation, not linear. Not linear thing, not specialization, not linear.
And that goes back to the whole re-envisioning the education department.
What do we have to teach? What is basic that has to be taught? I mean, back in Dickens' day, it used to be, you know, they would bang your hand if you didn't learn the irregular verbs, and spelling and this and that. And people who think history is important, you got to understand constitutional history. You got to understand quantum mechanics. You got to understand this and that. And there's so much to know. Do you realize how much there is to know?
There is.
And how do we determine? How do educators determine what has to be taught? What is so important? What has to be taught that can't be just maybe perhaps environmentally made available to people through other media, like the media that they're walking around in now?
But I think that
except we tie it to certification for people to be able to qualify. Let me make a point, my brother.
Sure.
What they're teaching people overall in a pattern is to listen to an authority figure and to respond to an authority figure. That's the main mission that the educational process, in the way it's structured, is there. And if you don't do that, and so you'll fit into corporate, so that you'll listen to the senior vice president in that in cubicle capitalism, or on an assembly line, you'll learn to do what you're told. That's what they're impressed. And they just beat the creativity out of the people through the educational process itself. And that we ought to have some sort of alternate way. What about charter schools? Do you think charter schools are a good idea?
Let me make one point, and I'll bridge into the charter school question. The first thing is that, if you want a totalitarian system where education is a bummer, of course, all of those principles that you apply. But it's the opportunity now to re-envision the educational system and to answer those questions about what really these kids need to learn. It's not what we've been learning for the past 100 years. We're in a different time now, so this is a great time to actually answer that conversation. What are the principles?
With it. Good for you.
What are the classes? What are the knowledge that needs to be imparted? And frankly, everything should be open for a discussion about how we bring it into modern times and educate young people today in a fashion that's going to be most beneficial to them as human beings.
Best important thing they can do is keep that creativity and that curiosity that is alive and sparkling in a 5-year-old. Keep it there more than anything else, rather than any special thing that they have to be taught according to some authority figure outside of themselves to teach them to fit into a society that is not democratic or is not liberating of the human spirit, which we have to get to.
I've been in a lot of schools. Charter schools, public schools, institutions of higher learning, grammar schools, middle schools. And I'll tell you, not all of them are created equal.
I know.
And the problem is that we need to get some type of baseline where we get all of them to start operating and moving towards the
whole society,
the better environment for learning. And I've gone in the classrooms where you're right. Kids sit there and they're just being
bored
thrown
out
facts,
of
and they're basically being taught for the test. They're being taught
that test thing is terrible.
To the test, and it's not about a creative or learning experience. It's about actually just passing a test
in order
and we know that doesn't work to teach
kids. A grant of money
kids.
to come from some government or private sector or something because you're demonstrating competence so people know how to do something that the corporate
visited the Manhattan Country School, just as one example, even though I've seen it at the Democracy Prep Charter School in Harlem. But my most recent, a few weeks ago, I was at the Manhattan Country School, and the classroom was alive with conversation and thought and this really intellectual exchange.
What level is that?
Between the young people, all the way from kindergarten up to high school.
Okay, good. That's good.
And we visited multiple classrooms, and there was an energy and an enthusiasm and a passion for learning because it wasn't as structured. It was not as structured as the more traditional schools, but it was structured around thought and around creative dialogue and around using information as a guide to drive conversation and questions and research on topics. That is more engaging to young people when they bring in the multimedia and they bring in their own research and they do this as a dialogue.
All the kids are bright as tacks. And what they're learning to do is socialize
too. My point is, if you go to the ones that are doing it the right way, the Democracy Preps of the world and the Manhattan Country Schools of the world. I'm worried about the schools that don't have the right kind of
We've always had the prep
schools. And we need to make sure that education is re-envisioned, it's supported financially, and that we move all education into the right place.
Thank you.
Now, charter schools. I served on a charter school board for...
Did you?
a year and a half. And so I got some interesting insight just serving on the board of directors of a charter school. I served on one of the 2 charter high schools in New York.
Is that comparable to what we used to call prep school, or is that the attitude you're going to take some people, you know what I mean?
Well,
because we've always had the Eatons and the Harolds and that kind of stuff
charter
for
schools
the well-to-do.
They're publicly funded, you know.
But you understand what I mean.
Sort of a hybrid between publicly funded but self-determined, so more of a private school sort of philosophy. But the reality is that, you know, I support charter schools, and I support them for the creativity that they have and sort of the autonomy that they have to figure out their own curricula and to manage their own operations. But they are not a replacement for the regular public school education system. The vast majority of students in this city are educated in public schools.
Yeah, that's right. And the public school system is very valuable.
It is.
It's got to be supported, not
charter schools are only located, most people forget this, but charter schools are only located in the most underperforming areas of the city.
Well, wait a minute. Charter schools are not comparable to prep schools, or the ones that are set aside, Eaton, Harrow, Philip Andover, and or you know those prep schools.
Well, they're comparable.
Where the children of the affluent and the children of the comfortable, the leaders go, and they did it in England, and they had a class system that was very strong, and they are going to be well educated to the responsibilities of leadership and all the rest of it. Are the charter schools in a comparable position, or trying to be, to the prep schools of old and still existing?
I don't think so.
For the well advantage.
I like to keep charter schools in their own category because remember they're publicly funded, and they through a application process. They can't just selectively pick who goes to the school. You fill out the forms, and then your kid, you know, if they have space, you know, gets to go to the school like a regular public school. The problem with charter schools is that the demand is so high that many schools have to offer a lottery system for kids to be accepted into the school because the demand is so high to go to the school.
Could we make all the schools charter school compliant?
But then,
why don't we? If there's such a demand, a market demand in capitalism would be, that's really good. We'll go there. We'll buy car A, not car B. And they would. Why don't we make them all charter school? What prevents that?
Because charter schools have been around for the past decade, and we're seeing some of the pluses of the charter school system. But I don't think it's gotten to a point where you can completely change every school over to a charter school. It's just that would be.
It's not universal.
That would be foolish.
Yeah, it's not universal
at this point.
It's like,
because there's some good things about charters. There's some good things about the curricula that they offer. There's some good things about the ability for them to create their own curricula, specialized curricula in many instances, where they speak to the needs of the community around them, or the wider needs of a particular audience of students that go there. But at the same time, the vast majority of kids go to regular public schools.
And the public schools should be supported.
And we need to make sure that the public schools take the best practices from charter schools, private schools, parochial schools, wherever, as we re-envision the educational system, and that the public schools have the ability to survive and thrive. In the best case scenario, there would be no need for charter schools because every public school would be performing at a level that was acceptable in a country that is falling behind.
And you would like to become a congressman in order to help the nation move in that direction of increasing opportunity and educational capability and human beings fulfilling their full potentiality as much as possible on a larger tablet if it's possible.
Exactly.
You got a bit of an idealist in you, which is a good thing to
Very
have.
much so. But I want to become a congressman because I don't just want to go to Washington, D.C. and work on legislation, even though I'm interested and passionate about the legislative side of things and writing legislation that's going to be impactful to real people, people that are going to send me to Washington, D.C. to speak for their collective interests and be their voice in Washington.
So that's one part of it, which is educational policy.
But where we've fallen down at is that we've got a lot of Congress people who go to Washington and they forget they're there because people sent them there. What we need to do is we need to work on the legislation there to make sure that there's funding and there's resource and there's all of these things that come together about a national dialogue about what our priorities are. But we need to have representation that makes sure that locally we're taking those resources as they funnel back from the federal government to the local level, and we champion those things on the ground in our congressional districts and make sure that we keep people actively engaged and involved in the process. I want to make sure that it's not just about passing legislation that provides more funding to the educational system. I want to make sure that I'm there to catch it in New York, in our districts, and go to every public school and evaluate what those needs are at the public school. Evaluate whether they're a school that needs more help with the infrastructure, or if they're one of the schools that needs more help with retaining and attracting good teachers who will stick it out there, because it's every school is different and they have different problems. You know, some schools would benefit from just having the ability to have more books and supplies. So they've got great teachers, but they just don't have all the other stuff. Some would benefit from having arts programs or after-school programs or preschool programs.
But that's where the curriculum committees are going to vary. You don't need all that fluff about painting and all that. All you need is algorithms, writing algorithms of math and science. Math and science, that's all, because that's where the economy is going. And the arts are given short shrift and everything like that. But you want to have the whole society move in that direction. I laud. You also have a very strong commitment to family values and that sort of thing, because you're very much with your own family and you appreciate that. Maybe that's worth talking a little bit. It does tie in. These things all interrelate to education and the larger issues. But
absolutely.
Talk about how we can support families. And one other thing, you live in Harlem, and I'm wondering, what do you think about the stop and frisk, racial profiling that goes on? I hear tell that the arrests and stops and so forth are overwhelmingly in the city of New York black and brown folk. And what do you think about that? Is there some sort of question about police that? And then one last little thing we'll kind of weave in is, what do you think about campaign finance reform? Because the Congress people, or the people in Congress, as soon as they're elected, they have to spend every working day wondering how they're going to get money to pay for television ads to stay in office. A bunch of interrelated things that we could address, as you suggest.
Well, let's do them one by one.
Okay,
family.
knock them off.
Very passionate about family. I've been married for almost 5 years now.
Wonderful.
We just actually we celebrated our 4-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
We're in our 4th year now. A couple of weeks ago, and I've got 2 small children. Family's very, very important to me. A boy and a girl. I lucked up and got the back to back on both sexes, so we're finished. We're retired from the baby having business. But I'm raising my kids in an environment, so again, very idealistically, I'm raising them in a community that I believe in so strongly. I want to make sure that they're brought up in a community that we all fantasize about growing up in, one where people respect each other, and they're multicultural, and there are all these influences that my children will be exposed to that make them better people. And you know, the education thing is one of the things that's going to be the equalizer between the haves and the have-nots.
That's why it's so very important.
So, I just think that we need to celebrate families. I was on the train the other day, and I saw this young man who looked, if you looked at him, he would look like, you know, one of these folks that we pass by every day and we make these mental notes about that are unfair. You know, we see a young African-American male who has a baseball cap on, and we put them into a category, and it's not fair for them. He was with his daughter, and he was reading a book with his daughter on the train, and it was such a beautiful sight, and I wish we saw that more, because he was a dad. And he was a dad who was attentive and doing the right thing. And if we stop looking at the labels and what people look like and our impressions of them and stereotyping, we would realize that we're all the same. We love our kids, and we're all trying to do the right thing.
That's important.
So I just think we need to celebrate families, and we need to celebrate folks, so that people understand that, you know, sticking it out, you know, it's tough being married, and it's tough, you know, making that type of commitment, but sticking it out can be beneficial for us and our children.
And we should have legislation that's supportive of
There's no legislation that you can. I think we need to lead by example and make sure that we celebrate the good things that we see about family, so that folks can emulate that.
And
not, you know, there's no legislation that you can pass to force people to stay married.
Can't force people to be good.
Or force people to do what
No,
they
I understand.
need to do.
And also
but we can celebrate it, and we can make sure that we prioritize it and do it the right way.
Right.
And the media needs to do a better job of making sure that the news we get is not all that bad news that we get.
That's all we
to
get,
reinforce these stereotypes.
Well, if it bleeds, it leads. As they
exactly
say, because it gets attention. Yeah. It's
now the second question was
well, they're all interconnected. I was talking about racial profiling.
Racial profiling. I mean, it goes into that stereotyping issue.
And the whole legacy. It used to have a Fugitive Slave Act, and I mean, there's still that kind of stuff. And you're from Harlem. And there's overwhelming evidence that the ones that they stop and frisk and give a hassle
that goes
are black
to the stereotype.
And it also goes into foster care where they take kids away
Correct.
from people.
That goes into the stereotype.
Are black and brown 90 percentile. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Isn't there something to be
That goes into the stereotype.
Yeah.
And it goes into the unfair assumption that black and brown males of a certain age, are up to no good. And, you just can't have a blanket statement about that. But at the same time, we need to provide more opportunities for young black and brown males to have other things that occupy their time, so that they're not just idle and the fertile breeding ground for negativity.
A lot of those guys are going to be bored with the school the way it's being done because they're trying to force them to fit into a thing like that. But learning, they're all bright and everything. But I'm just saying it's
all of us as human beings have certain capabilities, and it's a matter of whether we're allowed to utilize those capabilities and develop them.
It's really important
or not.
For people to have a sense of identity. They got something they can do that they can get. There's a term I hear
the
a
young
lot.
men that
I want
talk
respect. I want respect. Everybody wants respect.
Sure.
And there's a thing that is lacking in a lot of people's mind is respect. There's not respect. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly what you're saying, and that's the number one thing that people want.
Yeah.
People want respect.
All
people
people
want respect, and all people want to be considered that their needs and their wants and their differences
and their
are
ability,
accepted, appreciated, and respected.
And their ability,
and that's it.
Their abilities can be demonstrated in a way that give feedback from the society
Correct.
of their being relative to
now,
that.
The young men, I mentor.
That's identity.
I mentor some young men.
Good for you.
And these young men just want a consistent, respectful force in their lives. I was raised by a single mother. I did not have a man in my life when I was a child. So I just, a lot
Thank
of them
God
are
for the
looking,
grandmothers again, who
was my dad half the time.
Yeah, I hear you.
But
man.
It's a situation where in order to break through to these young men, they just need to have consistent, forces in their lives that are giving them the respect and the time necessary to answer their questions and to be there and to support them and to make them feel like they are worthy and worthwhile as individuals.
And our
institutions
are not adequately being able to provide them with that. And also, I hate to bring it up,
but the institutions are only half of the battle. An institution, a school that a kid goes to for 8 hours a day, that's just 8 hours a day. What about the other 16 hours? We need to figure out a way so that we provide the knowledge of how to be good parents and good mentors within our own house, because kids that succeed typically succeed because they're surrounded by people
What do we mean when we say
succeed?
What do we mean when we say somebody who succeeds? What is the mark of somebody who succeeds?
Well, let's
start
out with this mark. Let's start out with this mark.
Well,
in this country, we've got 2 million people in jail. Do you consider somebody who actually ends up at 18, 19, 20 years old in jail to be a success?
I think it is a disgrace.
Let's use that as a bismarck. Success is making sure that a young man who is growing up in Harlem ends up in a job.
Okay.
As opposed, and I'm just going to leave it just open like a job, as opposed to ending up in prison. That would be successful to me.
Okay, a job. Well, then that connotes. So there's two things about a job. One, it could give a sense of identity, or there could be opportunities. Like we produce programs here, you don't make money. You just express yourself. So there's no money tied to it. But the money is what's tied to it. What if just fantasize? What if everybody just fantasized for the hell of it? Instead of having to go and do a job to get money, and that's the major thing that holds the society, world society, that gets together, that's the most underlying thing is money, is to have money. Because if you have money, you can have what you need. A woman in Africa is wondering which of the 2 children she's going to let starve to death because she doesn't have a dollar bill to buy the food to feed them.
Right.
There's something wrong with the way the economic, and yet we have an ability to provide for everybody, and in order to get that, you have to have what they call a job. What if everybody had income? What if just for the hell of it, just say, if everybody had, say, I don't know, $60,000 a year or something, and all the problems of doing it, and everybody just had that. They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to go do anything. You know, all these people that own all the assets think all these people have to do something in order to validate their having money. But if they just had money, do you think many of the problems of the world would go away?
Unfortunately,
if they had enough to have a home, a family, they could do what they want, not what somebody tells them they have to do. The education is teaching them to do what the senior vice president or the drill sergeant or the prison guard is telling them to do.
Unfortunately,
do you understand what I'm saying?
Unfortunately,
and can we ever get to a point?
In a utopian society
You're
where
an
everybody...
Idealist. Are you a utopian?
Listen,
okay.
In a utopian society, I think that, you know, being an idealist, I would love to see a world where everybody had the ability to have sort of an even keel, basics taken care of.
It may be absolutely essential to the survival of the species that we arrive at that now. Unlike 200,000 years of existence, that is exactly what is going to. No,
but
that's what available.
There are things that hold us back from doing that. We all know in our hearts that that's the right thing to do. But the reality of it is that greed and the human tendency towards greed from the beginning of time is the thing that has kept us from doing that. Well, we have operated in an environment, and it is built on over time this notion that if I have what they have, then I want a little bit more.
Or no,
and that's a problem.
It's more like built out of a.
And the media feeds that, and you know we bought into this materialistic culture that makes us always want more. What we have is not good enough.
Well, the
materialistic, and we need to move past that.
Well, perhaps so. There's spiritual things people have asked us to do ever since Jesus and everything. But I notice that the political leaders always reify institutions that celebrate and accept as reality material. There's not nearly enough. So in order for me to live in a bigger house or me live in the king's castle, I have to take from others because it's zero sum. Everything is zero sum. For some to gain, others have to lose.
Right,
if whites are going to gain, they have to take it from the blacks.
Going back to simple, basic economics and
okay.
the supply and demand curves. I mean, you know, there's a supply and demand curve that determines pricing, and the supply and demand curves are manipulated all of the time by corporate interests and other factors that set a price for things.
Yeah,
and manipulate the price for those basic commodities that we're talking about that vary country to country based on the reality.
But everything, and realize unless
let's just talk about commodities, because if we're talking about internationally, I mean the commodity is, you know, the basic food, the basic shelter, and the basic things that we need to survive as human beings. We all got to eat.
Yeah.
We all got to shelter ourselves.
That's right.
And we all have to provide some sustenance for our immediate family unit. But the basics of economics apply, you know, across the board. We need to get back to a principle where we stop looking at each other based on the color of our skin and saying that they're not worthy because they're not like me, or based on their country of origin or their religion and say they're not worthy. I'm not willing to share my wealth or the wealth of the nation with these other folks. Well, and that goes to the principles of what this country is all about.
Thank you. Or the world, maybe.
Sure.
James Joyce, the famous poet, had him at Daedalus say, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. It's always been unjust. Ever since we've had civilization, you have a few people live in the castle and everybody else wallowing around in the mud. Yeah. There wasn't enough. And now we've got to the point where with extended consciousness and all the technology and everything that's coming, we're coming, since about the time you were born, the world has changed at a level of capability that is really existentially significant.
Certainly.
The weapon systems, let me make a point. The weapon systems now that exist are now, if they were to be unleashed like we've done as recently as the Second World War, are now, apparently from the modeling, are now species lethal. Right. That is, with binary biological, not to mention nuclear, the weapons that exist on hair trigger alert, ready to go, within a world where all the people have argued, if I get an advantage with a new Gatling gun, I can go conquer other people, steal their grain, realpolitik, get my tribe better, that kind of thing, has been operative throughout all of human history until this moment. Now we're getting to a point, that seems to be a fact. Tony Blair is very worried about that. I don't blame him. On the other hand, we've also, in many modelings, we have as a collective system transcended material scarcity as an ontologic reality. We can now, with technology, if we have an economic system that can do the capital formation and have the demand for the people able to clear the market. We have Keynes saying we got to get demand to the people. We have Schumpeter and Van Hayek and so forth saying you got to get supply. We got to have, but we have a capability of providing for everybody in an overwhelming cornucopia way.
And why doesn't that happen?
Because
it doesn't happen because the vast majority of the people in this world are a different race, background, color, or creed than the political establishment. But certainly, there is, and this has been the way that it is. You talked about it. You talked about the few people that have always controlled the means and mechanisms of commerce.
And it's still the same.
And the reality
it's still the
of
same
it
now,
is,
except it's bankers and whatnot.
Well, sure, but you know, it's a situation where unfortunately greed has
Do you think if
beyond our sensibilities as human beings, and it's easy for us to use these labels to keep people from working together.
That's the one that always...
If we brought people together around common issues, common goals, and understood as a world, we're more likely to survive as a species by working together and providing for everyone, as opposed to the short-term view of profit and how much money corporate interests and individuals make,
the person's usually
then we'd probably be able to add some years to our life as a species.
Well, I think it's more important because you get to the point where you can abolish evolution, and we come up the hominoid line, and we get to a point where now we could join entropy and just destroy the whole evolutionary process that resulted in Homo sapien taking the measure of the universe and whatnot. Or we can come to a point where there's been a qualitative transformation that all our institutions are out of date, predicated on zero sum, predicated on scarcity. That's not real.
Sure. Now I told you when I dropped out of high school, I dropped out of high school primarily because I thought I was too smart for my own good.
Well, you were pretty smart. I can see that.
But I'll say one thing. Have we gotten to that point where our species, human beings, are too smart for their own good?
Well, I think maybe might be. That might well be. You have to live with that. Yeah. 200,000 years, 10,000 generations. Isaac Asimov said in a program we did with him, this is the defining generation in the history of the evolution of the species. We are either going to join entropy, doing the same thing we've done, Iran, Israel, something. We're going to let the weapons go. It's something to unleash the weapons of the United States of America in a spasm of hatred, which has happened. Or we're now at the point where we have transcended in modeling, in terms of our capability, not the reality. It's all unjust. The ironclad laws of scarcity. There is enough. Now, we look ahead 1,000 years, we're not going to be wondering about is somebody going to have a piece of bread to eat if we survive and if we move ahead. So that never is mentioned, or that's never brought up because the intellectuals are falling down on the job. They don't have an economic system that can be simul-financing. You have to have a system that get the capital formation so we can do what we're technologically capable of doing, of serving everyone. The overwhelming problem is you have to have demand. Lord Keynes said in 1930 letter to his grandchildren, we are going to be confronted with vast technologically induced unemployment. The only way we have to introduce income, buying power, money to people so they can buy the bread is to have them have a job on the estate, like a serf on a feudal estate where everything's owned by a tiny group. They have no other way to get income. And so you don't have demand. And that's why we're talking about a jobless recovery now in this year. You don't have the way, people are not going to have the ability to buy what we're able to do. And so you have to have we don't have that leadership coming.
There's one slight thing that you need to add to that equation. It's a demand for what?
Demand for what the market can produce.
The problem in this country is that we're producing stuff half the time that people don't need.
Not just this country,
and we have a demand for the stuff that people don't need.
Well, yeah,
but again, I'm concerned about people in this country.
Okay.
And I want to make sure we get our economy in check too, because our economy, which drives the rest of the world's economy, is something that we've got to pay attention to. We got to make sure that our kids are educated first and foremost before we start worrying about this other stuff.
Okay,
we're spending money in other other countries where we could be using those resources here to educate our kids better.
$3 trillion in Iraq. $3 trillion.
But the point is that the demand for what? Is it demand for stuff we need, or is it demand for stuff that they tell us that we need?
You got the whole advertising industry. They create the. It's not that the people they're really competing because the people, the masses, don't have, because they have to have some way of getting a job on the estate, where the assets are all owned by a tiny class and then their peer review systems and everything like that to keep control over the people. And the way they do it is they let all the assets that are increasingly responsible for production to be owned by a tiny plutocratic class in every political entity and the model of the international order as well. There's no vision for getting independent ownership to the people so that they have money coming to them by the fact that they own technological assets that bring capital overwhelmingly to those who do own it. We have to spread ownership. But
true.
One last
being
thing.
an idealistic and not a feudalistic person, I actually think that we got to start somewhere. And if we start moving in the direction of making sure that people, everybody, regardless of what their background is, has a fair shot, an equitable shot to move their lives and their collective of their family forward, then we're in a better place. Okay. Not in the final result place, but not at the end zone, but we're in a better place than we are.
Well,
and we've got to start changing our priorities in this country
on a large
around
tableau.
Education, around job creation, and around health care to make sure that everybody has the basic fundamentals of what we expect our quality of life to be in this country.
You come strippingly off the tongue. The only way you're going to get people to be successful is for them to have what you call a job.
Correct.
They're going to have a labor relationship to production, and they're going to get value for that. They're not going to have any ownership of a combine producing 50,000 grain.
Well, hold up. Not necessarily so. One of the fastest growing sectors in the economy has always been the small business growth. And in a district like the 15th Congressional District, where we have so much development that's going on, there are many opportunities for entrepreneurs if they had the right type of support to spring up. And then, you're working for yourself.
Let's jump here.
So it is. There are opportunities for folks. I mean, some people are going to migrate towards working for someone else or a corporate entity. Some are going to be entrepreneurial and want to work for themselves and fill these niches. And others are going to want to become educators. And others are going to want to provide government services.
Yeah, but you're talking
about
all
options
and
choices for
world that
folks.
is enthralled to the labor theory of value, that you're going to keep the people enthralled to the idea that the way they get money is to have a job. Not that they own capital assets. If they own a capital asset, they get money. If the capital assets are increasingly responsible for production, automation en masse is coming. It's going to replace with algorithms human beings on an assembly line.
On an assembly line, but there's going to be things that you can never replace human beings on.
What?
Coming up with the technology, you can't replace that. Machines can't come up with the next thing. Machines can't build buildings yet. You can't have a giant robot that puts up a building.
It's getting there.
Well, but
it is getting there.
The point is, though, that there's always going to be opportunities and things that human beings can do. We'll define other things that human beings do.
Yeah.
The personal touch has always got to be there.
But
the point and the thing that you're leaving out of your equation is that we have the opportunity to direct our own course. We can do that. We can direct our own course. We're not just going to sit back and wait for something to happen and then just deal with the outcome when we have the power to chart our own course.
That's good. We want everyone.
And we need some leadership that's going to be able to stand up and help people chart that.
And we got to get somebody in the Congress that can help do that, and that somebody might well be Vincent.
I hope so.
Vincent, all right. I think and the one thing about idealists, if you're an idealist, and the one thing that always the cynics will come up with is they say it can't possibly happen, because human beings are greedy by nature.
They are.
That's not true. It's malleable. If everybody had $70,000, it'll get to the point where they don't have to think about the material getting of income as the one thing that motivates all our institutions. We're going to have to get to that, or we're going to blow it all up, is what I'm saying. So we need economic leadership in the realm of economic theory and political support for an altered system that is almost coming like punctuated equilibrium, a new species or a new relationship to the universe and what we're in, and we're falling down on the job. But with you in the Congress, if you get there now or whenever, All the very best to you. Thanks. It's a great pleasure talking to you. Sorry we got off on all these issues, but they do interrelate.
They do, and I just appreciate being on the show.
Thank you. You feel positive or negative for the human prospect?
I feel positive, and I always feel positive for the human prospect as long as we're here.
All right. Well, you and your 2 kids help underscore that positive attitude.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks a lot. Your pleasure to have his perceptions. We invite you to come back in tomorrow. Thanks a lot for coming. Sorry I got off on sidetracks, but it's all interrelated. Sure. Thanks a lot, Vince. All the very, very best.
Thank you.
It's good. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. See you next time. Please tune in. Okay, brother, we're out because I can see we've gone, so...